Okay, we're going to share the Sicha we're learning, talk of the Rebbe, from the year 1974, the 4th of Sivan, 1974. Okay, so the Rebbe says like this: Haschal Parsha, the beginning of the Parsha, meaning this week's Parsha, is Vaidaber Bamidbar. God spoke to Moshe in the Midbar, in the desert. V'Hashem Zeh, because this is how the parsha starts. Nikra parsha kula v'sefer kula b'shem Bamidbar. So seemingly, this is the reason why the parsha this week is called Bamidbar, and the whole book is called Bamidbar. So traditionally, the book and the first parsha have the same name. Like Bereshis is the first parsha, and it's the book of Bereshis. Shemos is the first parsha, and it's the book of Shemos, etc. So this week's parsha is named Bamidbar, and the book is called Bamidbar, the fourth book. So the Rebbe says, aside for the reason of why the book and the parsha are called Midbar, just bring let everyone in. The pashtus aim creates the glass tables by Midbar Parsha. So the reason why we call the book Bamidbar and the Parsha Bamidbar, because that's the opening verse. The opening verse says Bamidbar Sinai. But that's not just that, because it's not just happens to be by chance that the first verse mentions the word Bamidbar. Therefore, the Parsha is called Bamidbar. There has to be a lesson of why this week's Parsha is called Bamidbar, meaning in the desert. What's the message of calling this week's Parsha the desert? And the book called the desert. Even more so when one studies the teaching of the holy Baal Shem Tov, Hayedua, that's known, that a person has to find, in general, teaches that a person should try to find a lesson in their service of Hashem, any situation that you encounter, whether you see something or hear something, this should give a lesson to everybody. You should try to find a lesson in your avodas Hashem, service of God. You see something, you hear something, someone says something to you. You should try to implement some sort of change or some sort of tweak in your avodas Hashem, the service of God, based on what you just experienced, whether you've seen it or heard it. Hey, Shana, even worldly things, any kind of experience you have, doesn't have to be something that's necessarily openly connected to something godly or even something Jewish. But even something happening that happens in your life has to give you pause to see how you could learn from it a lesson in your service of God. So even more so, the last time if something that's connected to the Torah, the fact that the Torah's name, the Parsha this week is Bamidbar, this is not just any simple happening that happened in your day. Someone held the door open for you and you want to learn from that a lesson in Avodas Hashem, which that's a great thing. But this is something that this is part of the Torah, that this is how the Torah opens this week's Parsha, and that's the name of the Parsha. As in our case, we have to surely find a lesson in our own service of Hashem for the fact that this week's Parsha is called Bamidbar, the desert. Because the name of a parsha, even though it was given the name based on the custom, we mean to say that the Jewish people accepted upon themselves that this is traditionally going to be the name. It's not like it's written in the Torah that this is the name of the parsha, but this was the minhag Yisrael, the custom. And when the Yisrael is like this, then that itself is Torah. Like it's brought down many times that a minhag itself is Torah. And based on what's brought down as a sign in the Torah, again, the Rabbi Yaakov Baal HaTurim, who was the kind of the first who really put together the code of the Jewish law. Based on that is the Shulchan Aruch. He's the one who divided it into the sections. And the Beis Yosef, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, wrote a commentary on the Torah, and then using the Torah as the base, he created his Shulchan Aruch. But also the Rabbi Yaakov Baal HaTurim was also a big mystic, and we have his Pirush on Chumash. So he brings down, the Torah brings down Api Takanas Hagonim, based on the Takana, the Gaonic institution, or what they instituted. The Torah brings down the halacha that Bamidbar always is read before Shavuos. Means there's different parshas that could be read at certain times of the year. But we know that Tzav is read before Pesach, which is the second parsha of Vayikra, and Bamidbar, the first parsha of Bamidbar, is always read before Shavuos, and the Torah brings it down according to the Gaonim that this is the halacha. Zman Matan Torah, which before we read, we go to the Torah, we have to read the parsha of Bamidbar. This is a possibility that we should have also Nasai, meaning next week's parsha, can also, according to certain situations of the calendar, also be read before Shavuos Matan Torah. But like this year, Friday is Shavuos and Shabbos is parsha is the second day Shavuos. The next week is Nasai. In Israel, we read Nasai right after Shavuos. But this year, Nasai is read after Shavuos. But Bamidbar is always read before Shavuos. So the very fact that the Torah brings down that Bamidbar is always read before Matan Torah is that the lesson that we have to learn from the name Bamidbar and about the Parshat Bamidbar has to be directly connected with the holiday of Shavuos, not just a general lesson of the name of the parsha, but also this lesson and how it connects to the holiday of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah. So this is the Rebbe's opening statement. Basically, how do we understand? What can we learn from this week's parsha, and the name specifically, the name of this week's parsha, and connect it to the holiday of Shavuos? The Rebbe says like this: we find many reasons why the name of this week's parsha is called Bamidbar, the desert. And the connection to the desert, to the Torah that was given in the Midbar. So the very fact that over here we have to look at it from a perspective means the Rebbe says there's many angles we could take to try to connect the message of desert to the giving of the Torah. But when we're talking about from the perspective of the holiday and how it connects to every single Jew, because every single Jew has the holiday of Shavuos, not just certain people. Everyone was given the Torah. Mirei Sheichem, from the heads of the Jewish people, Shiftechem, the heads of the tribes, Ad Chote Veitzecha, till the wood chopper, V'shoiv Memecha, and the water carrier. So even someone who, if you want to say, seemingly is a more simple person, but that doesn't change the fact that he or she was also given the Torah. Is how moving shahayrot tzricha is ba'ofen hachi pashat hamovim mipashas gam lanashim pshutim. So if we're talking to everyone, and included in everyone is even people that need to hear things simply. I mean, don't give me a whole complicated speech and a pilpul of how to connect the desert to Torah. You're talking to everybody. So if you're talking to everyone, you have to find a lesson that everyone could understand. Even the most simple-minded person, or the person who's hearing it on the run, could understand, oh, that's the connection between the desert and Torah. Don't sit down and say, you need 2 hours to listen to my whole speech with all my footnotes and commentaries to understand the connection between the desert and Matan Torah. So the Rebbe says we have to look for the most simple explanation. And not just a simple idea, but a simple idea that is connected to any place. It means anyone, no matter where that person is. Can't say that if you're singing Eretz Yisrael, if I live in Israel, if I live in Brooklyn, then I understand the idea. But if I'm living somewhere that seems to be in the middle of nowhere, Jewish-wise or any-wise, then the message is not talking to me. But because it's not only, it has to be applicable to every time, no matter what situation we're in, for whether it is in an individual's life or the history of the Jewish people. But every second, the message has to be applicable. Not even throughout. They can't say, well, this message means something to me. Shabbos, I I close everything off. So now I could plug into this message. The message has to be every second. Because the lesson is in how we serve God, and we're serving God every second. That's the point you're created. You weren't created for any other reason. I was created to serve my master, beginning and end of story. Everything else is part of the declaration. Hashem put us in this world to serve him. And serving God is just like you take a breath, call it a neshama. You take a breath every second, that's life. So too, every time you take a breath, you have to have that breath has to be connected to some sort of focus on avoda, on integration, the shamash is kaini. So the lesson has to be applicable to all times. There's no separation, just like you can't separate your life. You can't say I'm taking a pause of living. Life is constant. If you take a pause, you're not alive anymore. V'yesh levar hashayches shabamidbar in Matan Torah. So to understand the connection between the idea of the desert and the giving of the Torah, at an initial glance, giving of the Torah and the message of the desert are two opposites. Why? Matan Torah, the idea of the giving of the Torah is obviously a high point, a high moment, a high idea. The Torah is coming down, is given to the people in the world. It never happened before. In the 2,000 years before creation, before Matan Torah, from creation, there was the fathers knew about Torah. They studied Torah, they had yeshiva, but there was never the giving of the Torah. It's like a gift. It's God's Torah. The Torah is Torah of Hashem. When we call it Seidah, and of everything that God created, there's nothing that's chamud. Chamud means pleasurable or desirable to Hashem more than Torah. It's a hidden treasure that God hid for the Jewish people and waited for the right moment to give it to them. And the Torah, about the Torah, it says, it's like shashum is like a pleasurable gift, or like a shashum is also like, it's like a sweet, a toy, or something that's very, very enjoyable to God. Shepar, that's like tainik, like something that's pleasurable, that gives pleasure to someone. This is a trigger for pleasure to Hashem, is the Torah. Because there's many things in a person. That like a person has many things that fit your needs. But certain things that you have no choice. You need, for instance, lechem, bread. You need to eat. If you don't eat, you're going to die. So you need it. It's a hechlich. It's something that's essential. But there's certain things in our life that they're not essential. You don't need them seemingly to survive. At the same time, it's an additional pleasure. That a person says, I want this. Why? Because if you don't have it, is everything going to fall apart? Possibly not. But I take a pleasure in it. That's the difference between essentials and tainuk. Something that's pleasurable. That's known about the bracha that you've created in the Fashis Rabbis many souls. It's the bracha we make after we eat a shahakal. And you take care of to give them life. So there's things that are for hechroichim, for essentials, and there's things for tainugim, for pleasure. We do not in Maila, so to in heaven. In Torah itself, Torah has different levels in Torah. There's the level of Torah it's called lechem, like it says lechu lachmu belachmi. There's a verse that says, "Go take bread from my bread." There's the level of Torah, the way Torah is essential. Just like a person needs bread, like the story of Rabbi Kiva, right? Maybe the Romans asked Rabbi Kiva, "How are you teaching Torah?" There's so many decrees at the time of Bar Kokhba. If you're teaching Torah, you're going to be put to death, and he was put to death by the Romans. He was murdered. But they asked him, "How are you doing it? You shouldn't be doing it." He says, "The Jewish people are like fish in water. You can't take the fish out of the water. The Torah is like the water to a fish. So last time a person needs bread to eat. There's the component of Torah that in order to survive, you need Torah. That's the level of survival of Torah. The Torah gives you gives you your essentials. Here the Rebbe says a chiddush. That's not just essential for us, that we'll have to eat the bread, but he calls it my bread. So just like bread is an essential food for the person who eats it, it's also an essential food for God because he calls it my bread. So there's a level of Torah that's essential for God. But there's the levels of Torah that are above what's called the essential. It's a survival. But there's the level of Torah that's called tainuk, the pleasure of Torah. And it's like the highest level of godliness, where again it's not essential, it's not dependent, and therefore tainuk is from the highest points of a person. So too in godliness, it's the highest point. And God says the level of Torah that's sha'ashuim, that's a pleasure to me, I'm giving to the Jewish people. He's giving the pleasure element of Torah also, not just the survival level of Torah. The people live in the world, you need Torah to live. So if you look at Torah as a guide for life. That's a survival. How am I supposed to get? What am I supposed to be doing here? So I look in the Torah. Torah gives me that survival level of Torah. God didn't just give us the Torah on the level of to survive the world or to get through the world. He gave us the pleasure part of Torah, which is the higher level of Torah, which is pleasurable to Him, and He gave it to us as a pleasure. So that's the highest. So that's Matan Torah. Matan Torah was that God gave the highest level of Torah, connected to the highest level of godliness to the Jewish people. Seemingly, what it means, what the Rebbe is saying over here is that the moment of giving the Torah, the fact that He gave us the pleasure level of Torah, means He wasn't giving us things to just the essentials or things just to survive. It means Matan Torah is a moment where God is like a person gives something to someone else that you don't have to give it to the person. The person doesn't need it to survive, only because you really love that person and you feel so close to the person. You're ready to give something of your pleasure that they should have pleasure. So that's the highest level. That's the moment of Matan Torah. What's the Midbar? The Midbar is a total opposite. What's the desert? The desert is the lowest place. You can't even grow wheat to make in the desert. The desert is not a place that feels grow. There's no fish, there's no seas. I mean, the desert is a desert. Like the pasuk says, it's a land that you can't be zayrei, you can't plant in it. It's not really a place for people to live. Right? The pasuk says, Eretz lo yashav adam sham. The desert is not a place for people to live in. How do people make the desert livable? Either you kind of you want to go to a lifestyle of desert, or they try to make the desert green. But the desert on its own, as a desert that has destitute, has nothing, is not a place for a person. The Gan Lo Bayachim doesn't really have that many animals also. You can't compare what's going on in the jungle to what's going on in the rainforest to what's going on in the desert. Of course, there's life there, just like there are people, the Bedouins that live in the desert. It's not a traditional place for people to live. Not only that, the Rebbe says, the domestic animals, you're not going to find cows. You can find, there are some, of course, exceptions, but primarily what lives in the desert are animals that do damage, that are mazikim. They're mazik, they damage a person. Like what? Like a nachash, a snake, saraf, a serpent, akrav, a scorpion. It's a dangerous place. Seemingly, what's the purpose of the desert? You can't plant anything there. People don't live there. There's only things that can hurt you there. So the desert and the Matan Torah are two opposites. Seemingly, it's a place that's dangerous. So how do we connect the two? How are we talking about the desert in this week's parsha, and also that the desert was the place where the Torah was given? So the idea of giving of the Torah. Torah is the idea of God giving the pleasure of Torah, His most pleasurable thing, a level of pleasure by the Eibusher to the Jewish people, not even an essential. And where does He give it? In the desert. In this week's parsha, the desert before Matan Torah, which is a place seemingly of the lowest places of creation. They're opposites and seemingly far apart than opposites of each other. Rabbi Yehuda says, to the point is like this. So why was the Torah given this in the desert? Why didn't God find a really beautiful place, a beach, a beautiful patch of grass? You know, some really, there's many, we can all give God we can all submit in the suggestion box places that maybe would be nicer for God to give the Torah. So why did He specifically pick the Midbar? Now, anyways, it's a lesson to us. Why is He giving us this gift? Why is God giving us the most pleasurable thing to Him, to the Jewish people? Because the idea of the Torah is, how do you see the power of Torah? Is its ability to penetrate the lowest places. If Torah is only a place of that it can only produce and be effective in certain environments, that's not what we're talking about. But if the Torah is able to, I was watching a video, they were having a question about the greatest NBA players of all time. So they're discussing certain players who played today and certain players who played when I was young, the Larry Birds and the Michael Jordans. So they're saying you can't compare. Those days, there was one player who was able to take a team that had nothing and make it into a championship team. Today they have a player. The player needs to be built. We have super teams built around them, so they can only play with great players in great situations and great everything. And then they want to say that my stats shows I'm the best player. That's not a sign. The sign is how do you do in a place where you have no options? You're the only player on the field. So that's the idea of Torah. Torah is the only player on the field. The Midbar has nothing else going for it, and God wants to be able to penetrate there in the desert. That is how he makes himself a dwelling place in this world. God's desire for a dwelling place in this world is not to be found in nice places, nice situations, with nice people, with people that never sinned, or people that never had challenges. That's not what motivated him to create. God wants to be found even in the situation of a desert. How the Torah been given in a place of Neshavas? Neshavas is from the word, is the root of the word Yishuv, a place where people live, right? He would have given it outside, he would have given it in the stadium somewhere. How you knock in line, a person might have thought. Why was the Torah given in a nice place? Because only the Torah can be effective, with nice people, in a nice environment, where everyone has good jobs, when the GDP is doing well. So that's where Torah can be effective. The Torah will never be able to go to the desert. The desert is not a place for the Torah. It's too dangerous. So God said, no, that's specifically where I'm going to give the Torah, in the desert. Because it's a lesson. Not only that the Torah is not intimidated by the Midbar, but that you could do your own thing in the desert. The Torah has to be effective in the desert. And you have the ability to be effective in the desert, and that's why God gave it to the Jewish people in the desert to show them there is no place and no situation that you shouldn't be able to make changes with Torah. And this is understood in the Kolshike, even more so. So if you're able to make an effect, right? They say that in Chassidus, they always give the example of a lever, right? If you want to pick up a car, you have to use the jack. You try to pick up the car from on top, you're going to rip the car. You have to pick up the car from the bottom. So too, if you're able to be effective in a desert, so a person living in an Eretz Shavas, a person who lives in a normal place, can't say, well, I don't have time for Torah. The Torah can be even effective in the desert. So if it's effective in the desert, there is no scenario going upwards that the Torah can't be effective. If it can be effective in the desert, surely it can be effective in a civilized place. There is no place in the world that the Torah can't and should not be, and therefore it has to be effective in every place. Now here the Rebbe goes further. This is when you say Das Elyon, we learn many times it's the difference between Das Elyon and Das Tachten, right? The large perspective or the small perspective, or this perspective from where people are, or from God's perspective. So from our perspective, we say, okay, there's a desert. Can the Torah be effective in the desert? That's Tachten. Means we're intimidated by the desert. And when we look at the desert as a Metzias, as something that exists, nothing that we can do, it's out of our control. The question is, if we're able to use it to take the Torah and be effective in the desert. But that's only the perspective of Das Tachten. From the lower point of perspective. But from the higher point of perspective, God says, what are you talking about? The only reason the desert was created in the first place is so the Torah should be given there. God creates the desert. So that's what the Rebbe says. That's why the Midbar was created. God created a desert that has nothing, that has no growth. People don't live there, has damage, because he wants the Torah to penetrate there. God didn't create anything for waste. The desert is not a mistake, or it's not a consequence out of his control. That God said, okay, when we create a world, that's the balance of things. It has to be a desert. Okay, go be effective within the desert. The only reason the desert exists. So you should show that you could change the desert with Torah. Even a person who may not be the smartest of all people. No one does something that in some way or another you don't benefit from it. Even if the benefit is a yashar koyach, that someone says thank you, or you feel good about yourself, or you feel your time is well spent. But you're constantly negotiating with yourself, is this worthwhile? Do I want to do this right now? Or you feel that that's something I have to do. But the word tayalis means there's something in it for me. There's something that I have to do here. But last God, I'm going to get a Kadosh Baruch Hu, so to God. He wouldn't create something if they didn't have a purpose. The reason the desert exists is so that a person should go out and figure out a way to turn the desert into a place of godliness. And not only that in order for the Torah to be effective in the desert, the Torah has to be full force. For someone to get excited in the shul and on some Torah and Yom Kippur, when everyone's saying Hashem Hu Elikim, it's not a big sign of how great the moment is. Why? Because everyone's in the moment. The fact is, when the Torah wants to be effective in the desert, you need to charge Torah at full force. You can't use Torah light. You need to use the full force of Torah. There's an example like a fire. Torah is an example of a fire. The verse says, these are the words of fire. The words of Torah are the words of fire. That what does a fire do? The character of a fire is to burn and consume, and so to say, destroy whatever it's trying to burn. When do we see fires full force? When it's trying to burn something that's putting up a fight. Right? A live tree that's full of moisture, not some dried out twigs or leaves. The fire puts up a harder fight. And like the Rebbe says, there's a big storm, there's a fight. You see, there's the smoke, and you hear the crack, and you hear the moisture fighting against the fire, but the fire is going to win if you give it enough time. Then the fire has to put up a good fight against something that's more thick and more alive and more difficult to burn. Something that's more refined, light, burnt out, dried out, it burns out in a second. It gets consumed easy and fast. The Rebbe says even further that this is also when a person wants to see. A person wonders sometimes in their own life. The Rebbe is saying when we take the next step, we're taking it to apply it to ourselves. Right? So where's the chap? Where's the chiddush? Where's the unique moment when you get inspired, or whether you're dividing people up? A holy person gets inspired versus a person that's much more challenging, or in your holy moments versus your disconnected moments. So when you're more serious, when you're gashmius, when you're material, when really things that are going on in your life are really strong in your life, and then the fire of Torah has to put up a big fight to win. When you're full of anxiety, full of stress, and you have to be able to say, I'm going to sit down now and learn for an hour and not think about my troubles, the fire has to put up a good fight because your troubles are pushing at you, and the things that are the anxieties are pushing at you. So that's the real strength of Torah. Torah wants, it's a challenge for Torah to be able to go into a desert or in a person's moment of a desert and to put up the fight, like the fire that has to burn a live piece of wood. And we're then moving down the it's all lesson to ourselves. A person may ask the question, when again the closing of Matan Torah with regard to the giving of the Torah, what does it mean? How does it work that God gives us His Torah? God giving a creation, a human being Torah. There's his hega atzmacha. Imagine for a second. Like we said before, Torah is God's Torah. Torah is not just, God doesn't, I once brought my daughter to my in-laws, so she took some things before, many years ago, and she wrapped them for her cousins. So she came in and she said, she made her own wrapping paper. She brings it to her cousins, and so she gives like an old jump rope and a broken pen. I said, "Oh, so nice that you brought them." She goes, "Well, I don't use them anyways." So, but God didn't say, "Okay, I'm not using the Torah anyways. I'm giving it to the Jewish people." This is something that's important to God. It's even God has. It's a lesson for God. It's a hayrah. It's called Torah Hashem. The word Torah means a lesson. The root of the word Torah means hayrah, which means a lesson. That means we're constantly learning from the Torah. And if it's called God's Torah, it means even one Torah, it's also in the form of a lesson. It's a God looks into Torah to get insight how we should be doing things. There's a statement, where's that in Medrash 21? Zohar Chodesh says, God looked into the Torah and he created the world. His Torah also gives insight to God. What he wants to understand. What does it mean to create the world? Well, how does he create the world? He looks in Torah and sees Torah's perspective. That's why they say this is called the Torah world. Everything about the world, God looked into Torah to create the world. There can't be something that exists in this world that's not inspired or guided by Torah. Even not only from our perspective, from God's perspective, because he used Torah as a guide how to create the world. So says the Zohar. So every person, even the most simple person, understands. Even the smartest person is not comparable to God, obviously. God made someone smart. God gave that person wisdom. As it says, we give wisdom or smarts to a person who's smart. God gave from his smarts to people, but that's why you're smart. God gave you the ability to be smart, and he gave it throughout the generations. The Rebbe says there's a concept of 18,000 levels of smartness. Nevertheless, none of those people that were very smart throughout the generations, including King Solomon, come close to who God is, to God's smarts, so to say. Why are they called students of Chachamim? Talmud Vasik, or Asam Ish Pashut, because we're all students compared to the God who's the great teacher. So the point is, a person may say to themselves, how could something that's God's be given to us? The highest of people are not close to anything close to God. What does it mean that we get God's Torah, which he himself uses it as an inspiration, an insight of how to do things? Valf became, nevertheless, notwithstanding of the distance and the separation, the infinite separation between the Creator and the Torah as it is by the Creator, and the creation, and even the highest levels of creation. God came down to the Mount Sinai in Kol Rash, Sturm, with all the commotion, right? The trumpets, the sound of the shofar, fire, storms, the whole situation, all that he saw, all the chariots of all the angels, everything that was there was mamish a full king's parade. I'm super with Parshat Bamidbar as the Torah describes of how God came down on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai. He gives the Torah not just to certain people. He gives the Torah to every single individual. Even to a simple person who doesn't have the ability to even understand what he or she is saying because of their simplicity, that person was given the Torah. The halacha is that we make the blessing in the morning for Torah, and you could call up anyone when the Gaba in the shul is giving out aliyahs. Anyone who's a Jewish person who's over the age of 13 and is a male can get an aliyah. That's the fact. Notwithstanding, if the person, we don't give a person a quiz to see if they understand Torah, because you can make a bracha on Torah even if you're just reading the words of Torah. Whether you make the bracha in the morning, like we do in the morning, or you call up to the Torah, it's not a bracha levatala. It's not a wasteful blessing. Well, the person says, well, it's not a blessing for me because I don't understand Torah. You could read the words of Torah. Torah is given to you. And in the blessing, we don't lie. We say God gave us, me, this Torah. He didn't lend it to us. He gave it to us. So he didn't borrow it from him. We're not renting it from God. God gave it as a complete gift. The Rebbe says for a second, just pause. How could it be that God gave his Torah to any person? Any person. So the answer is, we find something even bigger than that, something more impressive. What? So there comes the answer. The answer is, look where he gave the Torah. He didn't give the Torah in his palace. He didn't give the Torah in a stadium, coated in gold. He gave it in the desert, on a mountain that had no life. In the lowest place, as we explained before. Therefore, there's no more questions. What does it mean that God gave it to us? How is it that he gave us the Torah? I'm definitely not worse than the desert, because the desert is only a place of damage and there's no production there. Everyone could do something. So if the Torah was given and meant to be effective in the Midbar, surely there's something that I could connect to in the Torah. Surely, if the Torah can make an effect in the desert, it must have something that connects to me. Even if you look at yourself and say, there's no way that I could be a shomer Torah, I could be a person, a guide or a guard for Torah, that I'm a person that the Torah is meant for. It's not possible. God never had me in mind. It's not, you mean you could have the most horrible self view of yourself. But that doesn't change the fact that if the Torah can be effective, we're not here to argue if you're right or wrong about your views of yourself. That's another conversation. But even if you want to say that you're on the lowest level, we're not having that discussion now if that's true or not. It's usually not true 99.9% of the time. Nevertheless, the Torah is still given to you. This is what it says when the Torah was given. That the Jewish people camped around the mountain. Rashi tells us immediately, what does it mean the Jewish people camped around the mountain? Like one person with one heart. Because it all comes down to the same idea. When it comes to study of Torah, there's different levels of how different people are able to study Torah. Some people have more time and less time, according to Torah. Some people have the ability to understand Torah better. Not everyone is expected to be as smart as the next person. Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe, the smartest person to receive the Torah. He was able to understand Torah on the highest level. People told him to see him Yeshua, he gave it to Yeshua, and Yeshua gave it to the Zikanim and to the elders. We say to our Mishnah, Moshe reminded the Gvur of God, Moshe learned Torah directly from God. Nicholas Aaron, and Aaron, his brother, Shanalai, he taught him. Moshe, Nicholas, one of them, the sons of Aaron came in. Nicholas was Zikanim, and the elders came in. Nicholas was Kohen, and the rest of the people came in. So Moshe taught obviously, why did Moshe teach the Torah to Aaron first? Before he even taught it to Aaron's sons, because the way Moshe taught the Torah the first time to Aaron was a different level. It was a level that Moshe and Aaron only understood. And the sons were not able to understand the Torah on that level. So therefore the sons weren't invited for that shear. And then Moshe taught it again to the sons of Aaron. They understood it on a much higher level than the Zikanim and the elders. Then Moshe explained it to the elders on their level. To the max they were able to understand it. And then the rest of the people came in. So we see there's clearly a difference of levels of people's understanding of Torah. That's okay. The Rebbe mentions a side note. The Rebbe says, asks a simple question, like we call a klotz kasha. In the tradition of Torah that's brought down, how Moshe taught Torah, it says Moshe learned it from God. He taught it first to Aaron, and then he included Aaron's sons, then he included the elders, and then he included the Jewish people. Why doesn't it mention when Moshe taught Joshua the Torah? Joshua was his super student and the one who succeeded him. Yeshua was not considered from the elders. It says, Hunar. The Torah calls him a young boy. So Nar was not a Zakin. If you want to say Nar means an age, and Zakin is an age, or if you want to say Zakin is an elder, is not an elder in age, but it's an elder in idea, in understanding. But then Joshua wouldn't be called a Nar then, a young kid. So he wasn't so young either. So Nar means he was young. He wasn't as Canaan, so he wasn't included in the third level, means he came in on the fourth level with the rest of the Jewish people. Until Moshe passes away, or getting closer to passing away, Joshua wasn't yet needed to be in his own special place. He was amongst the people. Only at the end of Bamidbar, the end of the 40 years, when Moshe asks God, I need to choose a successor. So then it says, a person that he could choose, that could understand every single person's moods and differences. Then he gives it to Yeshua. So even though we say in the Mishnah, Yeshua, he gave it to Joshua. He gave it to Joshua later, separately. I mean, to say when he passed it over that he's now in charge of Torah, he's in charge, he's the head of the Jewish people. But initially, in the first 40 years, he sat with everyone else on the benches and listened to the shiur with the rest of the people in the fourth lesson. So there's since there's so many different levels. So what does it mean that we all stood together by the mountain? One person, one heart. Each person understood the Torah differently. How could he say we were one person and one heart when we received the Torah, which each person understands differently? If you want to say after the giving of the Torah, we were able to unite as one person in one heart. So a person would say, okay, I understand, because Torah, after the study of Torah, it affected humility by the scholars that they shouldn't feel so great over the simple people, because there was Torah's effect on the people. Okay. This before they even received the Torah. They can't say Torah affected humility. We say that the people are really greater, but they were humbled. It wasn't even after the days, because we know the Gemara Shabbos tells us that Moshe got the people prepared for the Torah up until the 6th day when they received the Torah. But we were talking about the first day, before Moshe even started to get the Jewish people ready. What's the reason? How were they able to stand like one person in one heart? What united them? Because then when they got to the desert, because the point is when he came to the desert Sinai, and as far as the Torah is concerned, it wasn't like there was a bittul that the person understood, wow, Torah has made me, I was able to work on myself, to humble myself. The Torah is saying the Torah sees everyone as a desert. Because from Torah's perspective, no one really receives Torah, no one's on the level say they receive Torah. So it's all that the reason why everyone's getting the Torah is because God wants specifically to give him a place in the desert. And from that perspective, everyone's equal. Everyone sounds equally. They're not trying to put anyone down and saying that you're not special. Everyone's special in their own way. As the Rebbes would say, the Rebbes always would point out that just like a person has to know their faults, you also have to know your qualities. It's not healthy to only know your faults. You have to also know your qualities. After all your qualities, but as great as I am in comparison to the Torah, I'm a desert. Then you realize that from the Torah's perspective, everyone's equal. Why? Because the Torah is so great. It's like, it's like an ant, a bigger ant, a smaller ant, all ants. So as far as the Torah is concerned, everyone's great. So when you stood by the Torah, they received the Torah. They were receiving such a high gift from such a high place. From that place, everyone was a desert and everyone was equal. And therefore they were able to stand by the camp. No one felt their qualities over the next person, because those qualities weren't a reason why they should receive Torah. Because as great as any person individual was, that's not enough of a reason to receive Torah. God decided anyways to give the Torah. But after this unification, which we know this week's Shabbos is known as Shabbos Achdus. The Rebbe coined this week Parshat Bamidbar, the Shabbos before Matan Torah, when the Jewish people stood by the mountain, one person, one heart. That this should be a Shabbos. Why everyone should feel Achdus, because we go back to the moment. And at this moment, when we're standing by the mountain, especially this year, where Shabbos Bamidbar is Ramash right before Chodesh Tivat, it is a Shabbos where everyone feels equal. No one feels superior over the next person, because we're standing by the mountain. And this is how we receive the Torah. When a person is able to find this unity, from the perspective of realizing that we're all in the desert together. Like we find in davening, in the Siddur, the Siddur is for everyone. The Siddur wasn't written for one specific type of person. From the smallest people, to the largest people, whatever that means. Although the Alter Rebbe didn't just write a simple Siddur. It was very hidden ideas of Kabbalah and Chassidus and how exactly the nusach of the Alter Rebbe was. No matter how high a person is, and even if you understand the levels of Chassidus, everyone comes back to the simple Siddur. This is the nusach. And you look in the Siddur when you daven. And therefore the Alter Rebbe in his Siddur didn't write anything for certain individuals. That you write and says, if you're a special person, think this and this. But if you're a simple person, skip. There's no skipping in the Siddur. The Siddur is for anyone to learn, to daven. What does the Alter Rebbe say in the Siddur? That before we daven, we have to say that I accept upon myself to love my fellow Jew. You want to daven, you have to become part of the rest of the people. You have to be standing by the mountain, everyone, one person, one heart. So too when it comes to Torah. How do we get ready for receiving the Torah? It's through achdus. You can't be individuals. Your individuality comes out later. Yes, the people are not meant to accept Torah exactly the same. Everyone has their skills and their talents and their qualities and how they can understand Torah. That's later. But the initial standing on the mountain is ish echad levacha. Everyone stands united, one person, one heart. There's no reason why you receive the Torah more than the next person. You have no schus, no merit. You have no ownership of the Torah more than the next person. This has to be remembered. This is very applicable to today's days. It's applicable to things that are going on now, even in Eretz Yisrael now as we speak. That has to be a clear message. Notwithstanding of the discussions that are real discussions and proper discussions, no one's making light of them. But nevertheless, we have to understand the Torah belongs to everyone. It's not that we compromise the laws of Torah, but no one has an ownership of Torah more than the next person. When a person receives the Torah with this mindset, it's clear. Then you're going to be successful in receiving Torah. Then you could truly accept the Torah like the custom is. And we say you should be Kabbalas Torah b'simcha with happiness and joy. When a person goes out to the world with simcha, with joy and happiness, when they take the Torah, so then they're going to be able to be more effective. It's easier to imagine you're walking out of Matan Torah to go be effective with heavy steps. Oh, it's so hard for me to be a Jew. Oh, it's so hard for me to do Torah. Then you're not going to make it difficult to be effective. When you run out, you sprint out of Matan Torah with simcha, with joy. Commercial isha tzava, like a soldier. Shaholech b'simcha goes out on a march. Then you'll be successful. As our rabbis would always wish each other, and we're wishing each other right now, that we should have Kabbalas Torah, we should accept the Torah b'simcha with joy, with premise and internalize it, and not to be something that's external in our life, chas v'shalom. Right, everyone? Thank you for joining. Baruch Hashem, we're able to finish this talk, and have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos, everybody.